Um, Then another group is working on academic pathways. And this is where getting into some customized pathways, especially at the secondary level. Some of the things that they've identified as critical changes within the classroom itself is giving more choice to kids and families, more flexibility and pacing of classes based on individual needs, project-based learning, making sure we have those clearly defined skills, partnerships with the community so things can be more authentic, giving students actually a chance to kind of design their own pathways and more interdisciplinary to help people with connections, help kids with connections. This is kind of a fun one because they actually spent a lot of time Googling which are some of the top high demand, high skill occupations for the next, as predicted by people, for the next 10 or 15 years. You can see they made a long list. But at the bottom, you can see that they've started to brainstorm. Doesn't mean that it's going to stay like this. Areas of interest or pathways around human services, healthcare, information technology, business and marketing. And I think they added actually something to this one. I think it's engineering, manufacturing, construction, and development. It's a long one. But, and again, this is just a beginning list, but these were some of their key. Arts and communication was put on the list too. Key areas for organizing frameworks. And then some of the things that all of these would have in common would be student choice, multiple ways to get there, aligned with middle level programming, local partnerships, and standards integrated into authentic projects. One of the things that we're reading a lot about or seeing is that this generation, this digital generation of kids, don't really tolerate simulations the way like in the old days when I was teaching, you could do a lot of role playing and that kind of thing. They don't really tolerate that very well. So we have to make it as real as possible. And then the last group has been working more on that assessment or feedback side. And what they were envisioning is assessment from a standard grade report would change so that there would basically be reporting out on things like content knowledge, which would be traditional, but then also content skills, as well as, I think we've started to move towards calling these life skills, either career readiness skills or 21st century skills. We were kind of struggling on what to call it. And then they also had a spider web where you could have a multi-level piece that would expand by grade level, like the different colors you see there would be different grade levels, so you could track growth over time. And then have some check marks where things could be checked that, yes, you've mastered standards, or no, not yet. And their kind of summary of where they're at is there's a need to prepare students for life rather than simply measuring just content knowledge, which is kind of our typical report card at this point. We need a monitoring system that has those three components, and therefore we should be measuring on a growth continuum and whether or not content is mastered, and not so much in terms of the traditional piece. So next steps is we meet again on May 20th, and we'll be kind of expanding as we go. Our plan is Guiding Coalition will give us feedback. We'll take that, refine, but keep growing until we think we're at the point we need to be at. But we have 4 meetings left, and keep you informed as we go, and then it'll be up to you, obviously, to approve final recommendations. Questions? Did I answer your question, Mary? So you can see what they're starting to think about for an individualized plan.
And are classes generally smaller when you teach this way? Because I can see with each student on their own plan. How do you reach 30 students?
Typically not, at least not in this districts that I'm aware of that are starting to do this. But that's why the technology is such an important component, because, and in some ways, we have good examples from elementary teachers of how you do this, but a lot of it is sort of setting your kids, your students up to be working on different things all at the same time. Elementary teachers are very good at this. And with the technology, you can have them working in groups or individually, and then be the, the teacher as facilitator, as manager, to make that work. Like when we went to CAPS Academy, you could see, they were running, not identical, but similar size class sizes, but they had kids working on all different things all at the same time. And the teacher was able to manage that.
It's probably part of that realization that being the sage on the stage just doesn't work anymore. And, you can get to a lot of kids, you can get to 30, 40 kids in a secondary level that with that type of methodology, but it's just not an effective model anymore. Other comments or
Question,
questions?
just kind of to Mary's point, how do you get the teachers on board to do that though? I mean, some of them, it seems like you wouldn't necessarily have 30 individual plans, maybe you have 10 or 15 or whatever. Do you try to categorize them, or you get some people working as teams, if you will, and then how do you get all your teachers on board, and how does that compete, third question I guess, how does that compete with a PLC environment, or can they work together?
Well, PLCs, I would argue, help with that in the sense of teachers then are kind of taking that journey together, and they can use the data from their individual profiles to try to, yes, sometimes you're gonna group. I would argue, I think the biggest mistake we make in education is that we swing to extremes. The reality is a classroom, there will be times where a lecture is appropriate still. There are also times where you can just do things just in time. And, Andy Brown, he got so excited, he went back to one of his classes and revamped a unit just to try it out. And he said what was amazing to him was how it really changed the engagement level of the students. And a lot of his teaching then became just in time. So Group A was working on something and they needed to know how to cite things a certain way, so he was over there showing them that while others were able to work independently, and you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, is this a huge shift for teachers in terms of how they were taught to teach? Yes. Does it take time for teachers to make this change? Yes. But, our majority of our committee is teachers, and so far, we've seen really nothing but excitement so far. I think they know it's a big challenge, but I think that they are, willing to go there as teacher leaders, and as we get more people involved in the fall with implementation teams, hopefully that carries it. But that's why it's a 5-year window. It's not something we're gonna just turn around and instantly be able to do starting tomorrow.
I think part of our struggle too is that, as being a Southern Ring school, we're always compared to kind of the golden triangle of all the high-flying school districts, and we always do a great job of being just above the state average, and in some cases, 10% higher, and so we do a nice job of that. But when we look at where we want to go, it's sure not for lack of effort or the time commitment that our teachers put in. And what I'm learning and hearing from our teachers is that we can't possibly put in more hours, or we can't possibly do that much more of just putting kind of the nose to the grindstone, working harder. But maybe structurally, if we work smarter, there's a way that we can get up to those other schools that we desire to be like. And I think that there is just a very there is a definite structural piece to us making some significant leaps and bounds with the types of kids that we have. Our kids can compete, they do compete. Our best kids go to the best colleges, they get to go to their colleges of choice. But structurally, a lot of our best kids would do well in any structure. What we're looking at is if you take our secondary redesign now and go from our students who need the most help to the high flyers, what system will work. And I'm hearing our teachers say there's a sense of relief that we aren't asking them to just do more and work harder, because we know they're already doing that.
And it absolutely takes time to change that. And for some teachers, it will be a much more difficult path to getting there. And others, your early adopters who are typically in your leadership committees, they'll, like Andy Brown as an example, start trying things the next day, and that's why as it pertains to, second order change, we have to take a long view. It's not something you can just rush to put in quickly. But, if we can put in structures to support the work, then slowly but surely, you know, you get there. And I'm just excited, and so is Dennis. Dennis has remarked every time we meet that he's amazed by the committee, really based on his experience in other districts, because they're just really eager and willing to kind of go outside the box without, you know, really getting hung up on the what ifs. Has
Yeah.
really been Dennis's feedback
Yeah.
to us, and he works with lots of districts on this kind of change process, so.
Well, again, I go back to, there's no question, the people we hire are phenomenal teachers. The group that we're working with are phenomenal teachers. We know that our kids are no different than any of the other kids in the southern metro ring here. So if we look at and we compare the teachers being as excellent as any group out there, kids who have as diverse of needs as any other district out there, structurally, if we don't change what we're doing, we're going to get the same results that we always do, that we're going to be just a little bit better than average. And I think that we're at a point in time where that's not acceptable anymore, and we're willing to invest to make sure that we do those types of things. And when I say invest, there's a strong investment by our teacher group. It's that grassroots kind of feeling. When you watch our teachers work in this type of a setting, I mean, it's inspiring, it's motivational, it's how, I mean, we're kind of holding them back almost because they want to get going and make these things happen. So I think, too, when we segueing to the meeting that we have coming up on the 22nd, I think our community is going to get a real interesting evening, because we're going to take a cafe approach where these three groups that Nancy brought up, we're going to have some of our teaching experts talking about the work that we're doing in the redesign from the secondary level, and you'll be able to go from cafe stop to cafe stop to cafe stop, think about it, and then come back and reflect as a large group. And while some of the research stuff is pretty heavy theory, there's a lot of just practical things that they're going to be able to show and explain that I think people, when they walk away, are going to get a sense of, oh, this is what you're talking about. Because we really haven't been able to define how we're making the academic changes and the needs that we have. We just haven't really done a really good job of clarifying that. Coming out of the 22nd, I think it'll be pretty crystal clear the types of things that we're talking about.
You know, and I think the other two things really, Jim Rickabaugh said this in his design team meeting. I think Dale mentioned it the last time we meet. It isn't a lack of effort on the part of school districts or teachers. It's that there's a design flaw, and he does a really good job of explaining that. And we keep just adding and adding to a structure that really, and organizing principles that are just don't work in today's world anymore. So that's why you have to do the restart, basically.
Right.
And I think, I forgot my.
Well, and Nancy, might it even include, I mean, some of the ways we've bracketed and structured transitions, some of the ways we academically group kids, grade levels that we put together, things like that. I mean, there are some pathways to excellence that if you make some tweaks and adjustments along with these other things, now you've set your kids up, your teachers up, your students up for being the best, best situation they can be. And there's just some real obvious glaring academic things that our best practices and our educational researchers would say, you know what, you're really putting yourself at a disadvantage before you start if you don't make some of these changes. And so that too will be coming out of our academic group, is some of those structural recommendations.
And I guess the last point I'd say is I think we're in good company. Rod came across a piece that's been put out by Edina, who is doing similar work, really. And it was interesting. They had a nice little video, because they're starting to roll out some of their work that they've been doing the last few years around a lot of similar concepts. So, we're not alone in trying to take this kind of journey. There's other metro schools doing this work as well, so. Yeah.
So what level is this gonna be for, all levels?
Well, there's a lot of implications of the work that we're doing for elementary. So what Rod and I have talked about is once we have secondary sort of well on their way in terms of figuring out how we're gonna be working with them over the next 3 to 5 years, we need to get started with elementary so that we can kind of back map from where we wanna be with our graduates to what's gonna need to change at the elementary to make a good transition to the secondary.
I could see pre-K to.
Oh, yeah.
almost-
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yep, exactly. Okay. Yeah, else?
Amazing work.
Yeah,
It
good
is,
stuff,
it's
Nancy.
exciting work. It really is exciting.
I know this is early and you're still, got a lot going on, but I'm just curious, would it be possible for a student that doesn't really pick a grade to advance in certain coursework to the point where they might pop out of that grade level and
Oh, absolutely.
but so you could be in
Yeah.
maybe subject, you could be in multiple grade levels
Yeah.
depending where you're at,
Mhm.
and this system allows for managing
Yes.
that.
That's how it should, that's part of, you think of the guiding coalition document, part of it is we talked about guaranteed floor with no ceiling.
Yeah.
Once you take that ceiling off, you have to be able to accommodate that. So if it's a particular subject and they're 2 grade levels ahead, then let's let them be 2 grade levels ahead.
Aren't we kind of doing that already with some of our classes?
What I'm finding, Mary, is we are getting better at it, but there's also some things that have been kind of in our way. So we need to work on some procedures to make things easier around that. And then I think with some of these changes, we'll be able to propel that even further. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see if I can get this right. All business action items, 6.1, the 2014-15 preliminary budget.
You didn't just do it.
Please hold your applause.
And Mike, I know we've had an opportunity to review the preliminary budgets. Coming out of tonight, what are you hoping that you would like to get from the board?
I'm hoping to be able to approve, yes.
A really big check.
Three. Simple. Yeah.
For those at home, the board has had the opportunity to review the documents that Mike has in front of him, and what he's pulling up is fiscal year 2015 budget. What I was hoping for was Mike will be looking to approve this as a preliminary budget for 15. Again, we've reviewed it, the board has had a chance to review it, but there might be questions that you have, or there might be some call-out items that you'd like Mike to further explain, or Mike, you might have some call-out items. I don't think we need to go through each item right now, so.
Right, we did spend a half hour, 45 minutes, almost an hour at the last board meeting. There are some things that Dr. Thompson's bringing to the meeting tonight that aren't necessarily included in this budget, but that's why it's only preliminary. I think on the main page, we would look at the $950,000 increase to the general fund balance because of some revenue changes, and expenditure changes are mostly included.
Mike, can you just, for those that may not be, follow along to school budget, what does that really mean when you say 950 due to changes and whatever? What is the net, what's the simple version of what we're doing?
There were some revenue changes that allowed about a $6.5 million increase to revenue. There's expenditure changes. We needed to add some staff for the high schools that have the 150 students, 150 more students coming in. There was a whole bullet list.
So at the end of the day, I'm looking for a summary statement from you, Mike.
Okay.
At the end of the day, what are we
We're
doing?
going up projected to go up $950,000 increase in the general fund, which is our 85% of our budget, which is, again, staff and benefits. And that budget will cover all the staffing for the new kindergarten additions. It will cover the additional staff necessary for the growth that we anticipate for teachers.
So a quick takeaway might be that we're almost $1 million to the good in the amount of money that we're saving versus spending.
Right, that would be correct.
Thank you.
Increase the lunch price a dime, And I think the only other thing that I wanted to point out is, in the building fund, it shows a $12.2 million increase. That's mostly the kindergarten additions, that's where we'll account for the, kindergarten, the expansion to the, 5 elementary schools, 4 classrooms each.
And just for clarity, if I'm someone who's not necessarily following along, we're hiring, we have 15 new sections of kindergarten, we have specialists because of state statute on evaluation, we've had to add some assistant principals, we've added to our C&I, our curriculum instruction, teaching and learning, to help take care of some things, English language learners, and at the end of the day, we're still saving almost more than $1 million more than we're spending after we've made our investments in our school district. Is that correct?
That's preliminarily, yes.
Yep. So are there any questions, comments, call-outs for Mike on the preliminary budget? And when we say preliminary, that means that they're gonna get an opportunity for another month to review and seek feedback, and then add in.
Right, the 950 might be 900, or it might be 1,050,000, or just depending, we're going through the expenditures one more time, trying to nail things down.
And when will we expect to get a final budget approved?
June 12th, or next board meeting, I didn't
Okay.
pay attention. 9th? Okay.
Okay. Any questions or comments?
No, I think it's well done, I think it's reasonable, I think it keeps us on track and leaves us some room for options, as we're gonna discuss, I think, after this.
I'll make a motion to approve the preliminary budget.
Second.
Any discussion?
I just want to reiterate, Mary, that, we've had to make some, by choice and by mandate, some expenditures here that are on our list. But even at the end of the day, after we've gone through all of our required adjustments and needful adjustments, we're still going to have approximately $1 million of savings just in this next fiscal year alone. And I think that's important for someone who might look and say, well, boy, you got all these buildings you're building, and you got to hire staff and specialists and teaching and learning. Yes, we do. But one of the things about becoming one of the biggest districts in the state of Minnesota is that with that, we're really blessed to have the student enrollment piece where you get the new, couple 300 students bringing in revenue. Now we have to spend that wisely, but part of the expectation is that the students who are here now need to benefit from the formula. We're not a bank. It's not designed for us to take this money in and excessively take it in and then put it away for a rainy day, because as Nancy just demonstrated, it's raining now. It's time for us to make significant improvement now, and if we keep waiting for the rainy day, it'll never happen. So I feel very strongly that we can support this budget. And then there are a couple other items that I'm going to ask you to consider that have a budgetary impact. But we're still in a very good situation. And I would also point out that with that additional nearly $1 million, that's still keeping us with a fund balance overage of about 20%, which in today's day and age, there's a whole lot of school districts who would feel extremely, extremely lucky to be in that kind of a saving situation. And that goes back to when John McBroom was here, and he fought hard to get to a position where it could be nearly 20%, and now we've been able to increase and keep it at the amount that our auditors say that they feel comfortable with. And so I'm very happy with the work that Mike and the finance department have done, and I'm very proud that we're one of the top leaders in the state in terms of being fiscally responsible, and also not being afraid to invest in the kids that are here now with the monies that were given for the kids that are here now.
Any other
Well,
comments?
just kind of one question, you said that level that our auditors suggested, don't they suggest more like 18%? And so we're,
Actually, our board policy is 8%, and the auditors say about 12%, which is a 2 month, 2 months worth of expenditures.
so our auditors are very comfortable, is what you're saying.
Yes.
And if you look at most of the increased expenditures in this proposed budget, almost all of it is going directly to the classroom.
Mhm.
Any other comments? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion will carry. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Under item 7, new business discussion items, 7.1 is discussion regarding activities and athletics.
Thanks, Mary.
Superintendent Thompson?
Yep, thanks. I'm looking just for a couple of open dialogue types of things with, ultimately, I'm hoping that you'll point me to do some feasibility studies. We're looking at entering the South Suburban Conference, and as we enter that conference, I had John Janke meet with my cabinet, and we talked about the gaps that we have in some of the sports, and part of the kind of the spirit of joining a big conference, big hitter conference like the South Suburban is that we would perhaps look at some of those gaps that we currently have. So I'll do this in 2 parts for discussion. The first one is I'd like us to consider doing a feasibility study on the addition of boys and girls Nordic skiing, boys and girls alpine skiing, and gymnastics. That's the first feasibility study, and I'll make a few comments about that in just a minute. The second one is the feasibility study, and of course feasibility is there participation, is there budget, is there need of adding activity buses for 14-15. So let me go back up to the South Suburban. One of the things that John presented to me was back in 2012, so really not that long ago, his department did a study of 6th through 11th graders, almost 2,000 responses here. Actually, it was 2,000 responses. And I think that a couple of things, if you were to look at why we might want to consider doing that feasibility study, and I would suggest we could get that study done before the kids go home. It's one of those things that because of technology, we can get this done pretty quickly. Alpine skiing, for example, being out of John's survey, there were 35 students, and of course we used to co-op with Prior Lake up to 2012. 35 students in alpine skiing, I think that's a very good interest number for that activity. Then one of the things John asked was, how about the winter sports? Girls gymnastics. 304 students said they were interested in participating in gymnastics. Boys Nordic, 77. Girls Nordic, 87. Again, this is just a anonymous survey, so you don't know clearly how many of those numbers, and a feasibility would have to have a Gantt chart of timelines and benchmarks and most importantly facilities, because if you look at gymnastics, for example, in our community we would need to have a dedicated space for gymnastics year-round. And then, as some have talked about, when you do a feasibility study, you also include things like adaptive sports. Angela and I were talking about that earlier. Clubs, such as there were almost 900 students that wanted to participate in an archery club. There were almost 500 students interested in a bowling club. Table tennis, 400. So part of our conversation is defining what we expect of ourselves as a board and what we're willing to invest in when it comes to intramurals. You know, if we're going to offer intramurals, don't we want to be the best at it? If we're going to offer clubs, don't we want to be the best at it? And if we are offering Minnesota State High School League type sports, aren't we going to set ourselves up for success where students have the ability to be the best at it? And then also things such as marching band and orchestra. We've talked about that a few times, I know, at the table. And at this point, 2 years ago, we had 150 students interested in being a part of a marching band, and we had 190 students 189 interested in the orchestra. And again, some of these things like music can conflict with what we currently have or each other. So part of the conversation we would have to have in this discussion of feasibility is it's really a, some could say pre-K-ish, grades pre-K to 2, maybe not as much, but then you start hitting those feeder systems of orchestra and strings and all that. You start looking at the clubs, there's a lot to it, but I think in a short period of time, we could get you some budgetary items, we could get you a Gantt chart, we could get, what are kids interested? We could have John work with Crystal on getting us updated numbers, part A, part B, activity buses. We think we could, again, with the principal's help and technology, we could find out not only the activity buses for our sports and our music, but homework help after school, various clubs, various activities. And as we look at closing our achievement gap, I think some would argue that perhaps the opportunity gap for our kids socioeconomically and otherwise gets in the way, that kids can't get home. And I know that I sent a